Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP, and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil A. Colonna, and this is Nashville. All war is hell. The Vietnam War was no exception. Millions of Americans and Vietnamese fought in the war, and the war left lasting scars in its wake, both seen and unseen, that continue to leave an impact on our politics, culture, and for many, families. A little history. In the 1950s, after the fall of French rule in the region, Vietnam was divided in two. North Vietnam was communist, South Vietnam was democratic. U.S. leaders supported the South Vietnam government, believing in the domino theory, the idea that if Vietnam became a fully communist country, other democracies in the region would fall to communism too. U.S. combat units arrived in Vietnam in 1965 and didn't leave until 1973. According to the Veterans Administration, 2.7 million Americans served in Vietnam. An overwhelming majority of them were drafted. Over 58,000 military service members died in the Vietnam War, including 1,295 from Tennessee. In 1995, Vietnam released its official estimate of the number of people killed during the war, which included more than 2 million Vietnamese citizens and over 1.1 million North Vietnamese and Viet Cong fighters. In Vietnam, there were often no clear front lines and often no clear measures of success on the battlefield. And the public support turned harshly against the war and the soldiers themselves who were serving the country. In the decades since returning home, many Vietnam veterans reimagined and rebuilt their lives as citizens. For many, though, their personal fight continued, often unseen, through PTSD, physical injuries, and the impact of exposure to Agent Orange. The generation of Vietnam vets also fought very hard to get support and services from the government for recognition of their service and to change things for the generations of veterans who have come behind them. We're very grateful for the chance to hear personal experiences of two Middle Tennessee Vietnam veterans today. Pastor George Brooks Sr. was drafted into the Army and served in an artillery unit in the Army, and Rich Cresa voluntarily enlisted in the Air Force and is currently the president of the Vietnam Veterans of America Chapter 1140 in Franklin, Tennessee. Rich, Pastor George, welcome to This Is Nashville. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for being here.
You know, you both have so much to share. Your stories and experiences, they really deeply matter. Tell me this. We could spend a whole day together and still need a lot more time to get your stories. I want to acknowledge how grateful we are, truly, to have you both here on the show.
Thank you.
But Pastor George, you know, you had turned 19 when you were drafted, I understand.
I was 19. I turned 20 5 months after I was in Vietnam.
20 years old.
Yes. I was a boy when I went and came back a man.
Yes, you did. How'd you find out you were drafted?
I was getting ready to take a bath in a number 3 tub. I grew up poor, and my daddy had gotten the mail out of the mailbox, and he asked me, George, are you ready to go to the Army? I said, no, Daddy. He said, well, they're ready for you. And he handed me the letter, greetings from the President of the United States of America. And I was to report on the 25th of August of 1966. This was early August when I got the letter.
So you're sitting in the bathtub recently.
I couldn't get in that number 3 tub.
So you didn't get in the tub after you got that letter.
You sit on the edge of the tub.
Okay.
Yeah. It was a small tub.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I understand. So what were you thinking after you got that letter?
I was like, wow, what a change this is going to be in my life. I did not know really what to think next. I just knew I was preparing to go away from home for the first time, did not know that I would be going to Vietnam about 5 months later.
Wow. Now, Rich, you enlisted in the Air Force.
Yes.
How'd you make that decision?
I graduated high school and like most of my class, wanted to go to college. And so I went to college for a year and a half, and then I realized that I didn't know what I wanted to be if I ever grew up. and I felt I was wasting my time and my folks' money. But if I dropped out of college, I was going to get drafted and go to Vietnam. And I said, I don't want to go to Vietnam. So I figured a way to outsmart the military, the draft board. I dropped out of college and enlisted in the Air Force. So, and at the time, they were not sending everybody over to Vietnam. So that's that. And I went in March of 1966.
What did your family think of your decision?
They were disappointed that I wasn't continuing my college education, but they understood and they backed me about not going to Vietnam. And then things happened. Once I got out of tech school, my first deployment was to the Philippines for 18 months. And during that time, I was hearing, yeah, we should be in Vietnam, or no, we shouldn't be. And I'm going, I need to find out for myself. So I volunteered to go to Vietnam after that. And it's a decision that I will never regret. I'm glad I did.
Why won't you regret it?
Because I felt we needed to be there. We needed to help the Vietnamese. In 18 months in the Philippines, I had made acquaintances. The one year tour in Vietnam, I'm closer to those people than I was to those that I met in the Philippines. There's just a camaraderie there. In the Philippines, of course, I entered into the Air Force wanting to fly in some capacity. And I had an uncle, my Uncle Rich. He's my namesake. He was in the Army Air Corps in World War II. He was a tail gunner in a B-17, and I never knew him because he was killed over there. But my mom and parents would talk about him from time to time. And so going from the Philippines, where I was on the ground, to Vietnam, I was airborne. I was an airborne radio operator. And that was quite an experience.
I'd like to hear from both of you, but Pastor George, tell me about the moment or a moment when it became real to you that you were in Vietnam. Was it the plane on the way over when you stepped to the base for the first time?
The real moment was the 1st of April of 1967. And the reason I said the 1st of April, that was the first time I had experienced a mortar attack. I did not know what a mortar attack was like. I was on guard duty. I smoked back then, and I was lying out with my leg crossed on top of the bunker I had dug, and I heard and I saw the result of mortar rounds coming in early morning. And on the 6th of April, it really became real. I was pulling KP duty, and mortar rounds hit us about 11:15, about 15 minutes before time for lunch. And I ran about 50 yards or so to the bunker I had dug. And just as I got to the bunker, I felt something hit my arm, and I looked, and I could see the pink skin where the shrapnel had gone into my body. I do not remember doing it, but there was a guy who was running beside me to my bunker who said to me when we got to the hospital, "Thank you for saving my life." Because he said I grabbed him and pulled him into my bunker in order to get him out of the line of the mortar shrapnel that was flying all over the place in our base camp at that time. Nothing was more real than that. And I still have challenges with this right arm. I have osteoarthritis. I still have tenderness in the scar from where the mortar shrapnel entered. My body develops keloids, so I have a keloid where the scar is located that has flattened now, but it used to be puffed up. So it really became real April 1st and even more real April 6th of 1967.
If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Ekalona. We're talking this hour about Vietnam veterans. My guests are Richard Cresa and Pastor George Brooks Sr. Now, Rich, you were a Morse code intercept operator, right?
Yes.
You flew, I understand you flew over 150 combat missions?
No, about 135, 138.
135. Yeah. 138 combat missions. What were you doing on those missions?
Basically, we were doing airborne radio direction finding. We were flying in unarmed EC-47 aircraft, C-47s left over from the Second World War that were modified with electronics. And we would have at least 2 radio operators on each aircraft, on each mission. And one would be searching the dial looking for Viet Cong or North Vietnamese Morse code signals and lock on to the target and notify the navigator, and the other operator would start copying the code. And as we're flying along, the navigator could triangulate their position, and we would call that into the ground. We were unarmed, or the plane was unarmed, except we had a .38 revolver on our hip.
Okay. Only weapon you had.
That was the only weapon I had. But unlike Barney Fife, I had more than one bullet. So, but it wasn't a lot of bullets.
Pastor George?
And a lot of what he was doing would be communicated to artillery units that I was in. And my last 5 months that I was in Vietnam, I was a gunner in the artillery unit I was in. So what Rich did would be communicated to us, and our artillery units would fire into those areas. We would blow up bridges. We would blow up cities. If there were Viet Cong out in the open, we had an end we could put on it where it would actually explode before it hit the ground for the destruction of Viet Cong who may be in an area. So what Rich did was communicated often to us in that destruction process.
I'm curious about what it was like for you both when you came home. You know, how were you received when you arrived? Rich?
Well, before we left Cam Ranh Bay, it was strongly recommended that we change into civilian clothes. And flew back and came in to Travis Air Force Base area, California. Now, even if we were in civilian clothes, people could tell by the way we walked and by our haircuts we were military. It was not a pleasant homecoming when I got back to the States. People were calling me names. People were spitting or throwing things. And it was interesting. When we went over to Vietnam, we left a country. When we came back to a different country. And seeing that, having that happen to me on the West Coast, I flew home to the Chicago area, and family and friends are calling me a hero. So I was going from being what they called a baby killer to a hero. And my job was highly classified, and we were ordered not to tell anyone, not even immediate family, what we did for at least 10 years. So I couldn't tell anybody my story. I couldn't talk about it. And back in the day, you didn't walk down the street saying, oh, by the way, I'm a Vietnam veteran.
Right.
Pastor Brooks, what was it like when you got back?
Well, it's hard for me to tell because I got back just a few years after integration. So I really could not tell if the way I was being treated was because I was black or if it was because I was a Vietnam veteran. And of course, when I got back, I did not wear anything that identified me as a Vietnam veteran because there were still a lot of prejudices. When I got back in December of 1968, I got back in January of 68, I got a job at Gulf Oil Company only because the federal government required them to hire someone black. And I knew someone who gave me the information. I went and applied for the job. Even in 1971, I became the first black man to drive a truck for Gulf Oil Company. I got the job because the federal government required Gulf Oil Company to hire someone black. They called it as a delivery salesman. And because I was there as a part of the warehouse, I got the first option on becoming a truck driver. So a lot of mine, I'm not sure if it was the veteran status or the status of my color.
You're both relatively young when you went over there.
Yes.
You're young when you come back. As you said, Rich, you leave one country, you come back to a very different country. You know, how people feel about the war, the fact that integration is, let's say, the policy of the country, of the land right now, different places after you fought this war, and people have their feelings, personal feelings, even to this day, about the war. You're getting, at best, let's call it some skeptical treatment from people. How'd you process that as you're young, in your 20s? You can't tell people what you actually did. Did you find other veterans to talk to help you process what you went through?
No, I didn't. I tried going to a national veterans organization, and I went in there and started a conversation with a vet that was in there, and he said, well, what war were you in? And I said, Vietnam. And he looked me square in the eye and he said, that wasn't a war. Get out of here. You don't belong.
Wow.
But things have changed for the better.
Yeah. See, when I was in Vietnam, my last 5 months, I did the job of a Sergeant E5, but I was never promoted. I was a gunner my last 5 months, and my rank was Spec 4, which I was a truck driver. So some of those things that were outside Vietnam, where prejudices were concerned, I also experienced those in Vietnam. And when I came back, I got back in January of 68. In August of 68, I got out. I was training Sergeant E5s to do what I did in Vietnam, and I never got another stripe.
How'd you feel about that? Training
people?
It was
hurting.
Yeah.
It was extremely hurting to know that I knew what to do so well that I was training people who had the rank I should have had, and no offer was given to me for promotion. I did get an Army Accommodation Medal. The Army Accommodation Medal says it's for meritorious service. I was put in for a Bronze Star, but I never got it. This was in Vietnam. I was put in for Sergeant E5 while in Vietnam. I never got it.
What do you want, given both of these experiences? I'm supposed to go to a break, but I want to ask you both this question. You know, Pastor Brooks, you risked your life for a country that refused to promote you, not only for your valor, but your skills because of the color of your skin. Rich, you risked your life for a country, and you come back and other veterans say, the place where you risked your life, this war, this theater of war, was not a war, and I have to assume it's because we didn't, quote unquote, technically win this war. The fact that you both risked your lives for this, what do you want people to know about Vietnam veterans and the sacrifices that you all have made for the country?
Well, the one thing I want them to know that many of us have died needlessly from alcoholism and drug addiction because no one took the time to really get to know the struggles of what it is like being in a war like Vietnam. I am blessed that I never developed the taste for alcohol or drugs, because if I had, I would probably be dead today of alcoholism and drug addiction, because my brother was the victim of alcoholism and drug addiction because he is a Navy veteran of Vietnam.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. Rich?
Back in the day, the attitude in the country was hate the war and hate the warrior. And now the pendulum has swung the other way, where it's hate the war, but love the warrior. Vietnam veterans that I have been blessed in getting to know, like my Vietnam Veterans America chapter, we want to help veterans of all eras. I had met and spoken with an Iraqi war veteran who said when he landed back in the States, as he was getting off the plane, there were 2 rows of Vietnam veterans holding American flags, welcoming them home. I had the opportunity at one of our events to speak to someone who was very hesitant to come up and talk. And he said, and I asked if he was a veteran. He said, no. He said, you probably hate me. And I said, why is that? He said, because I was a conscientious objector. I went up to Canada. So you must hate me. And I thought about it, and I said, I don't hate you. At that time in your life, that was your decision to make. And I've had a different decision that I made. But we're family now. We're just back in the good world.
I want to thank you both for being here with us today. Rich Crasus and Pastor George Brooks Sr. are both Vietnam veterans. Again, gentlemen, thank you very much. And thank you for your service.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have to take a short break. When we come back, we'll be talking with 2 artists who are working to preserve the history and legacy of Vietnam veterans. Stay with us. This is Nashville.
Funding for This is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil A. Colonna, and this is Nashville. Today, we're talking about Vietnam veterans here in Middle Tennessee. We're now turning our attention to 2 people who are working to find and listen to the experiences of Vietnam veterans, and when given permission, to share those experiences. Susan Hunter is an author, speaker, and documentarian whose work, 77 Letters, shares the story of her mother's efforts to correspond with soldiers on the front lines of the Vietnam War who otherwise wouldn't have received letters in the mail at all. Johnny Crawford is the artist and project director behind the Vietnam Black Soldiers Portrait Project, which seeks to produce high-quality portraits of Black Vietnam veterans to represent the visual history of the 275,000 Black men and women who served in combat and supply services during the Vietnam War. Susan and Johnny, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, sir, very much.
Now, Susan, your work to preserve the personal history of Vietnam veterans and those on the home front came a bit accidentally, I understand. It started when you were in your mom's attic, right?
It sure did. It definitely was not looking for this, but I'm sure glad it found me. I was up in my mom's attic cleaning it out because my father had passed away and I didn't want her going up in the attic. So I was up there clearing things out and I came across this treasure trove of letters, hundreds of letters that she had written during the Vietnam War. And that's what started it all. You know, just going through the letters with my mom, who at that time was battling from dementia. And I was naive, thinking I could reverse the signs of dementia. So I was reading them, you know, with her for that reason. Well, she had these portals of recall that really just compelled me to read through all of them. Each one was as riveting as the last. And then at the end, I had to find these soldiers. And I did find this one soldier, Sergeant Johnson, who corresponded with my mother for 7 years from the front lines of that war. He had 4 tours in Vietnam, and they were wonderful correspondents. I actually call them spiritual soulmates. And we have 77 letters in just from him. And my mom had the wherewithal at that time to attach her carbon copy responses to all the incoming letters. Okay. So I have 7 years of dialogue from the front lines of that war. So it really gave me wonderful insight. And the reunion was what led to this jaw-dropping redemption.
So your mom and Sergeant Johnson actually got to meet.
They got to meet. Actually, they got to meet in '68 on one of his stateside leaves. He came and stayed with us for the weekend up in Scituate, Massachusetts.
Wow.
So they got to meet then, but then we did have a virtual reunion via FaceTime because my mom wasn't able to travel. And so that was the best that we could do.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Now, Johnny, you're the creative power behind the Vietnam Black Soldiers Portrait Project. I understand you weren't exactly looking for this project when you started it. Can you tell me how that idea came and how it grew from there?
Yeah, I was at my church's veterans breakfast, and I was looking for a project to work on. And one of the veterans I'd known for over 10 years, named Johnny Miller, and I'd always seen he always had a big smile on his face. And so he got up to tell his story, and he, talked about, being shot in the lung. And then the U.S. military dropping a bomb on his position, and he laid out there bleeding, for a couple of days. And then when he came back to the United States, he was not able to get his job back, so he had to file a civil rights lawsuit. And so after that, my mouth was just open. And then one of the guys says, well, Johnny has a great story. You should hear Byron's story. And Mr. Byron Powell, he was a captain down at Moody's Air Force Base. He was actually from Washington, D.C. And so the washer and dryer broke. And so he went across the street to wash his clothes. And as his clothes were drying, the door kicked in, and the sheriff deputy came and put a gun to both sides of his head. And he was so confused. And they said, "Can't you read?" And he's like looking puzzled. And he pointed up to, whites only washerette. And another story all this in the same room. So you hear about Fred Cleveland. Fred had been a walk-on for the Baltimore Colts when he got his letter. And so after hearing all these stories, I decided that, this was something that I needed to do to document these guys. And as I began to do the research, I remembered when I was a student at Morehouse, I did a stint as a photography assistant at a VA medical center. And that was when I learned the price of freedom. I had to take some pictures to one of the other departments, and I walked by the waiting room, and that's where I saw a young lady, older lady, excuse me, holding the left arm of this young man. And I remember it being the left arm because he didn't have a right arm. And I saw men who didn't have faces. I saw men who were burned beyond recognition. And the following week, one of my jobs was to photograph an autopsy. And the first autopsy I photographed was a Vietnam veteran. And that's where I saw cirrhosis of the liver. I saw cancers all in the stomach. I saw head trauma. So I had a good background about, what these men went through.
If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Ekalona. We're talking this hour about Vietnam vets and learning more about their stories from the people who are seeking to discover them. My guests are Susan Hunter and Johnny Crawford. All right, now, Susan, I want to read a couple excerpts of the letters from your mom, okay? So we have a second letter right here from Bob that wrote to your mom. He was in Japan after he was injured. He wrote this letter to your mom, Joan, on May 13th, 1966. Can you read that for us?
I have the letter from Joan to Bob.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'll read the letter. My apologies, everyone.
You'll do a much better job.
All right, I'll give it a shot. Okay, so it says, from Bob, 11 other men and I were separated and cut off from the company for 18 hours. I was wounded, as were most of the other men. But we killed 22 PAVN. I had to kill 5 men in hand-to-hand combat. The last big battle you mentioned hearing on the radio was near the coast of Quy Nhon. It's the name of the big area is Bong Son. This is the same very place where we did all this fighting on Operation Masher. It took us 43 days of constant battle. We then turned this area over to the South Vietnamese army. And what happened? 3 months later, we had to go back and retake it. The futility of all this wreaks havoc on the psyche. The war is a real rat race. I will surely be glad when this is over, but I don't think I would feel right sitting somewhere safe and sound as I am now in this hospital with the war going on. I feel committed and obligated to be here on the front lines. I will be relieved to get back to work. I don't think I'm mad or a sadist. I just feel this way. Each man is supposed to have a purpose in life. I guess this is mine. As you read that letter, what was the impact on you? What was going through your mind?
Well, for one, just the depth of the soldier. And I had not met Bob at this point. So for me, he was just a soldier I had heard about. But the depth he had and the duty that he had and the fact that he could understand that, war is awful. War is vile, but there are things more vile than war that cause us to go to war. And so he wanted to get back to protect. And he had this unrealistic expectation that he was going to protect all his men and all the villagers. And so he really took it to heart when some of his men died or when he saw the villagers being, killed or destroyed through the behavior and the acts of the VC, the Viet Cong. So he really had it in his heart that he was there for those, for the villagers and then for his comrades.
I understand you're working on a documentary right now.
Correct.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the healing that has come from the book spawned into me spending the better part of 2 years traveling the country and interviewing Vietnam veterans, their family members, some Gold Star families, the civilians that worked over in Vietnam during the war. I got to interview the chief analyst of the CIA during the war. I got to interview the 2 Pulitzer Prize combat photojournalists from the war, one, the Vietnamese gentleman who took that iconic picture of the terror of war, and United States, David Kennelly. He was the Pulitzer Prize combat photojournalist. And my whole purpose is to show the human perspective of war. And that is for one, we don't know much about it, and what we do has been miscategorized. And so we don't have a truthful picture of what that war was like, and especially not from the warrior standpoint. So you mentioned earlier about their return and how awful that was. It was really discouraging that the people who were maybe, activists against the war, and I get that, but they couldn't separate the war from the warrior. Mm-hmm. And so they took it out on that warrior that as you mentioned earlier, most of them were drafted and forced to go. You didn't have a good choice. You either had to flee your country or go to jail.
Mm. Now, Johnny, you've met with Vietnam veterans from over 19 states for the Vietnam Black Soldiers Portrait Project. What's it like for these servicemen and women to sit down for a professional portrait, given it probably brings back memories of their experience?
Well, the classic one was the first guy I photographed. This gentleman was Mr. Andre Council. And Mr. Council was so eager to get his portrait that he showed up a week in advance. And then once, I was in St. Louis and I was taking the portraits at the church, and the secretary called me and said, Mr. Council's here for his portrait. And I said, well, his portrait's not due until next week. And so Mr. Council was supposed to be at 10 o'clock. Mr. Council showed up at 8 o'clock. And I would later find out that Mr. Council was dying. He took 2 buses and a train to get to the church. And once I photographed him, he immediately wanted to see his photograph. But things were going on. I couldn't get it to him right away. And so Mr. Council never saw his portrait. The desperation for some of those men that I photographed, they were just happy that somebody would recognize them. As for now, I've only been to 3 states. I plan on coming to Tennessee, hopefully, this month. But so far, I've been to Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina.
Johnny Crawford is the artist and project director behind the Vietnam Black Soldiers Portrait Project, and Susan Hunter is a documentarian and the author of 77 Letters. I really thank you both for joining us today, and thank you for what you're doing, this work you're doing.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for caring.
Thank you so much.
We have to take one last break. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation by talking about how veterans are reaching out to each other here in Middle Tennessee and how anyone can get involved to support Vietnam veterans. This is Nashville. Stay with us. I'm Khalil Ekolona, and this is Nashville. Welcome back. Today we're talking about Vietnam veterans here in Middle Tennessee. We're continuing the conversation to learn more about how Vietnam veterans are continuing to reach out and support each other, and how anyone can get involved to make a difference for local veterans. Joining us now are Tom Freeman, a veteran who is the retired commissioner of the National Defense and Military Services and co-founder of Honor Our Veterans. And Tom Gallagher is the chief of the Center of Development for Civic Engagement at the Nashville VA. And joining us again is Richard Cresa, a Vietnam vet and president of the Franklin chapter of Vietnam Veterans. Mr. Freeman, Mr. Gallagher, and Rich, thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, since we have 2 Toms now, I'm going to say your full names so we can be clear of everything. It's the first time we've had something like that happen on the show. Rich, we're going to start with you to learn more about veterans, about the Vietnam Veterans of America. Can you tell me more about the organization?
This is a national organization founded in 1978, and its motto was "Never again will one generation of veterans abandon another." And this has grown nationally. In Tennessee, there's 30 different chapters. And I have been privileged to be with this chapter in Franklin since its inception in 2019. Our goal is to help veterans of all eras, not just Vietnam veterans. And our chapter does not sell anything. We go to these different events, fundraisers. I call them fundraisers, but they're community engagements where we set up our booth and have pamphlets and, in meeting the citizens and maybe Vietnam veterans or families of Vietnam veterans to explain to them what we have learned through the VA. And the main thing that we talk about a lot is Agent Orange and the effects of Agent Orange. And through studies, they have found that the effects of Agent Orange can pass from the veteran to their children and to their grandchildren and possibly beyond.
Wow.
And people are not aware of that.
Now, Tom Freeman, you served in the Air Force and the National Guard for a total of 28 years. You spent a long time trying to be involved in issues with the veterans. I understand last year Tennessee passed a resolution to honor Vietnam veterans. You give the audience an idea of why that's important.
Well, that's important to recognize all who serve, but in particular, the Vietnam veteran. In my family, like many, Rich and others that have, and Tom, that have served, for the service part, Vietnam veterans mentored me. As I was in jump school, it was Vietnam veterans that were teaching me how to jump out of airplanes. It was Vietnam veterans who were teaching me marksmanship skills. It was Vietnam veterans that were leading for me. And in my brother's case, he's in Section 44 at the National Cemetery, where he rests. That is what motivates me, along with a family tradition of service, to help. And if you work in some of the jobs I've had in the past, you learn how to access things that other friends, veterans, may not know how to do. And so getting a resolution sounds complicated, but it's really not. It's being able to write it and being able to get someone to carry it. And I thank Senator Jack Johnson here in Tennessee for being the person that I could go to and say, Senator, we need to recognize the Vietnam veterans. This 50-year anniversary is a big deal. And so part of that was then presenting that framed resolution to the Vietnam Veterans Association. And Rich took that, and now it hangs in our county, Williamson County
Museum and
Museum.
Yeah.
And that's thanks to Rich. So that's what we did. And we did it just to say thank you for the service, because as you mentioned earlier, they didn't get the homecoming. And I remember my brother changing out of his uniform at L.A. airport into civilian clothes because people spit on them and people harassed them. So it's a time to say, again, thank you to our Vietnam veterans and thank you to all that serve.
Now, Tom Gallagher, you work with the Nashville Veterans Administration. You oversee volunteer programs. There's a lot of different ways that people can volunteer with the VA, both in person and virtually. Tell us why it's important that people get involved, and also how they can.
Well, I tell everybody that I meet that I think I have the best job in the VA, because I get to work with individuals, organizations, civic groups, businesses that want to help us help our veteran patients. At the VA, we've got multiple opportunities for people to volunteer. Right now, we've got a great need for volunteer drivers. We have drivers that come in and drive out to veterans' homes, bring them in for their appointments. One of the Secretary's initiatives is access. And to get these patients to their appointments is one of the biggest struggles that some of these veterans have. They have an appointment, but they just can't get there. So these volunteers pick these veterans up. In Nashville, we currently only have one volunteer driver. One volunteer driver. We've lost all the rest. So,
how many Vietnam veterans live in Nashville?
Okay. Well, I know the Tennessee Valley Healthcare System services about 144,000 individual veterans, but that's all out of Tennessee.
Wow.
So we have a huge catchment area that we take care of our veterans, and we have people that drive in all those different locations. So that's drivers are a need. People working in the medical centers to help veterans, visiting veterans. We have youth programs where 14 to 17-year-olds come and do a summer's program with us and learn what we do at the VA. Hopefully we get them excited about taking care of veterans, and there are future doctors and nurses that will come back and help us take care of our veterans. But there's really any area in the VA that we have, we'll take volunteers to help us help our veterans.
All right, given the fact that you just told me some shocking news to me, that I believe is shocking, we have one volunteer driver to help a good number of veterans who are in need. Where can people go to sign up? Where can people go to sign up in the Nashville area to help out?
So they can go to volunteer.va.gov, and they can fill their information in, and that will generate a notification to us, or they can give us a call. I mean, we're at 615-873-8567, or they can send us an email at tvhvss@va.gov. If they have interest, one of the big things, though, is they have to pass a driver's physical, because we only want people who are safe and physically able to drive our veterans to bring them safely to and from their appointments.
Okay.
Now we take care of all that. I mean, everything's free for the volunteer to do.
Okay. Now, Tom, the other Tom, you tell me about your work in involvement with the statewide military cemeteries.
Okay, it's sadly it's It's a situation where we do not have enough capacity for people who want to be in a casketed burial at our federal cemeteries, which there are 5 in Tennessee, and the state has 5 more cemeteries that they operate under federal grants. So a gentleman who I know from Brentwood Baptist Church came to me, Don Belton, and said, hey, I just called the VA and they said I couldn't be buried there. And can you help me? And I said, well, let me look into that. Sure enough, we're short. We don't have enough burial space. Now, the state of Tennessee has been very aggressive through Tommy Baker's office, who's our commissioner, and he's working really hard to get more space. But the feds are sort of landlocked. So what we are doing is working in the community to get the awareness of the elected officials across the state, from the counties to the cities, and in our state governments to say, hey, listen, let's approach Washington, D.C. and ask for grant funds. They asked for grant funds of $7 million to build a new cemetery, which would be the state's 6th cemetery. We didn't quite make the top of the list. There's a million reasons, which we don't have time to go into here, which are good, solid reasons. We weren't picked on. We weren't excluded because we were left-handed or right-handed. There just isn't enough money. When you look at what's going on with the VA right now, they're talking about slashing their budget again. And inside that VA budget is where the funerals, the cemeteries are fixed, expanded, repaired, and then comes new. And so I believe we will get there, but it's not going to be this year. So we've been working on that, and also burials. This is simple. We were not burying people consistently with the way they should have been. We asked the Senate and the Assembly to come together and to give us money to get casket haulers for the 5 state cemeteries. We just got the first one last week. So we're making progress in doing a better job on not only having space, but also in the way we do lay our honored Vietnam and other veterans to rest.
It's really important that we honor our veterans of all wars.
Yes.
To rest and recognize their valor and their bravery. You know, a lot of people, you know, they attend and they see other veterans at the Memorial Day Parade, Veterans Day, National Vietnam Veterans Day, which is on March 29th. They see them at the parades, and it's really important, and I understand it's healing for Vietnam vets. Rich, can you briefly tell us why it's so important to see people come out to the parades? It's
the way we were treated when we got home, and not being able to talk about it for years. It's just amazing. I would march in the Nashville Veterans Day Parade several times, and that was good. But the first Veterans Day Parade, right after our chapter got its national charter, down in Franklin, I had been talking with guys and saying, I want to have our chapter represented. And we had a banner made with our logo and everything on it. And one of the gentlemen in our chapter said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not into parades, and I don't need that. And I talked him into coming. Mm-hmm. And we started the parade, and we were behind a high school band. Now, they tend to walk a little bit faster than we do. Mm-hmm. So there was a gap that opened up. And as we got up to 5 Points in Franklin, you couldn't see the front of the buildings for all the people there. They saw our banner, and they cheered. They clapped. They said, welcome home. Mm-hmm. And we're not even halfway down the block, and this guy pokes me in the ribs. He said, I've waited over 40 years for a parade. He said, this is my parade. It's just the outpouring that really means it. I mean, it's nice to have someone say thank you for your service, but this is beyond that. Mm-hmm.
As someone who did serve, and I can see, you know, how this has emotionally impacted you, how do you feel about the veterans who came back home but weren't able to see people line up on the streets like you did, like your former your friend who waited 40 years for that? How do you feel about finally being able to see that? Do you think about the ones who didn't make it?
Yes, I do. I had the honor of serving with a gentleman Big Mike. We served together in the Philippines, and then he followed me over to Vietnam, and we flew several missions together. And I left in August of 1968 to come home, and he had to stay a couple more months. Well, in October of 69, I came home. In October of 1969, his plane crashed, and he didn't survive. And every time I go to the wall, I look up Big Mike Stiglich, and I think about him. And I have been.
I'm really sorry, Rich. I got to end it there and run the credits. Yeah. Rich Cresas is a Vietnam veteran and president of the VVA Franklin chapter. Tom Freeman is the co-founder of Honor Our Veterans, and Tom Gallagher is the chief of the Center for Development and Civic Engagement at the Nashville VA. I want to thank you all for being here. Rich, thank you very much for your service. Tom as well. This is Nashville would like to send a special recognition to all service members and their families on this Memorial Day. Please remember to think about them. Thanks to you for tuning in this hour. We're a production of Nashville Public Radio. It was produced by Catherine Cece's, directed by Tasha A.F. Limley. Liv Lombardi is on the boards. The music is by LaRange and Namir Blade. You can tweet us, hit us up on Instagram, call us at 615-760-2000. Leave a message. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil A. Colonna. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody. Be good to each other. Be really good to each other.